The first 48 hours after a truck crash are critically important. There's evidence that can help prove your case, which might be worth millions upon millions of dollars that will be lost or even destroyed unless you take action in those first 48 hours. Hi, I'm Bob Byrne, and I'm Virginia's first and only board-certified truck accident lawyer. Today I want to talk to you about why the first 48 hours after a truck crash are so important and what you can do to protect your rights and to preserve evidence that's critically important for you. So let's dive right in. If you've been around my channel before, you've heard me say that truck crashes are always completely different than car accident cases. One of the reasons why is that commercial trucks have systems on them that record just about everything that happens. And those could be systems that are built into the truck like a black box. It could be something that applies to a driver like electronic logging devices, or it could be something that applies to the trucking industry like telematics systems. Now these various systems, either alone or together, can tell a story of what was happening with the truck leading up to a crash. It can also give insight into what happened days, weeks, or even months before this crash. And all of that evidence can be used to help your case. This data can show hours of service violations, whether the truck was maintained and running properly, whether the driver applied brakes in time to stop or avoid a collision. And so while that evidence can be so important and valuable to proving your case, there's a big problem. And the problem is that some of that evidence exists in very small windows and may exist only temporarily. And it's critically important that you do everything you can to try to preserve and save that evidence and protect it from being destroyed or overwritten. So let's talk just a little bit about some of the data that I'm talking about. First and foremost, we want to look at electronic logging data that may exist. Federal regulations require truck drivers to maintain records that show when they're driving, how long they're driving, and how long they're taking their rests. And so this is called hours of service data. And there's a bunch of hours of service rules because the federal regulations recognize that truck drivers oftentimes drive too long. And when they drive too long, they're fatigued. They may get ill. They may get distracted more often, and then that could cause them to fall asleep or not pay attention, and that is what causes so many crashes. Now this data needs to be kept electronically, but one of the problems is that the data may only be on the device for 8 or so days. So even waiting for a week may be too long to save that data. Now we've had cases where we've used the electronic logging data to prove that a driver was driving well in excess of the number of hours that they're permitted to drive each day. And we've used that to create circumstantial evidence that they were ill or they fell asleep, and that's what caused them to lose control of their vehicle and crash. And it's so important to have that information because motor carriers and truck drivers will rely upon defenses like sudden medical emergency, and they'll claim that they didn't fall asleep, but they instead had some sort of a medical event that caused them to lose control of their vehicle. And if you have the electronic logs and all of that data, you can show that they violated the hours of service requirements and that is what most likely caused the crash in question. A second item of evidence that's critical to get as soon as possible is the vehicle's black box data. So just like airplanes, most trucks on the road today have event data recorders or black boxes installed in them. And this is going to give a lot of information such as when the brakes were applied, what the speed was, what the throttle percentage was. It might provide information about steering inputs and other valuable data about the engine. This information can be overwritten if there's, say, a hard braking event or perhaps with the passage of time. And so it's so important to try to get that information preserved as quickly as possible so that you can get someone to do a download to make sure that that data is not overwritten. The third type of evidence that can quickly disappear is video footage. And video footage can come from a variety of different sources. A lot of trucks today will either have factory mounted cameras or they will install cameras after the fact on trucks. And those will record what's going on in front of the truck. And many trucks also have driver facing cameras that show what is happening inside the cab leading up to the crash and as the crash is occurring. The problem is it can be expensive to maintain all of this data, especially since a lot of it may not necessarily be related to a crash and it's just someone driving down the highway. You want to make sure that preservation letters are sent to the owner of the data, also the owner of the cameras, the owner of the truck, so that the data is not overwritten or deleted. You also want to think about the fact that many surrounding businesses or other drivers are going to have footage also. They may have dash cam footage, they may have Ring doorbell footage. We've relied upon all of those different types of video footage to help us in some very major cases. But that's not going to stick around forever, and so it's important that you have an attorney who's going to act quickly to locate those cameras, those devices, and to make sure that all deletion systems and processes are suspended so that that can be gathered and maintained. A fourth type of evidence that you want to secure just as quickly as possible is the truck itself and the car that was involved in the collision. Truck crashes are going to be hard-fought cases, and there's likely going to be forensic evidence on the truck itself, even if it's drivable after the crash. There could be paint marks or scuff marks or dents, and those can match up with the vehicle, and those can help tell a story along with the road markings to figure out exactly who is at fault. You can figure out where a crash occurred, you might be able to figure out what direction the vehicles were headed, and you can get a whole lot of information, but it's vital to go and to arrange for an inspection of the truck and the car that were involved in the collision, because otherwise those could be put back in service and evidence can be lost. A fifth type of evidence that is incredibly important to get would be activity logs, either for the driver or for the company, so that you could see exactly what was going on. We want to get correspondence, text messages, emails, other written communications that may exist, and we want to make sure that those are maintained and those are kept safe. I literally one time had a case where a truck driver claimed in litigation that he did not remember what his cell phone number was on the date of the crash, and he did not know who his cell phone provider was. Now that obviously told us that he had been making calls and using his phone in ways he should not have been using it. And so it's important that you act quickly to try to secure that information and as much of that as possible. We were able to get around that in that particular case and use that as a sword, but it just goes to show you how this evidence is treated by the defense, and you need to act quickly. In case you think I'm exaggerating about how important it is to act quickly, one thing you can do is Google trucking rapid response teams. You will find law firms that represent the trucking industry, that represent trucking companies and big insurance companies, and they will literally advertise that they will put a team together that will respond rapidly to a crash, day or night, any time of the day, no matter what, anywhere in the country. And that just goes to show you, they are saying, we will get there and we will start working on your defense and gathering the evidence and sifting through everything immediately, even before the crash scene is cleared. That's how the defense and how the trucking industry and how the insurance companies are approaching these cases. And you don't have that sophistication if you're in a crash, or maybe if you're even an attorney who's never handled a trucking crash case before. You don't have those resources, you don't have that know-how, you cannot compete with that. And that's why it's incredibly important to get with an experienced attorney who knows how this works, so that they can get their team on the scene, so that they can talk to the same witnesses, they can look at the crash scene, they can examine the vehicles, they can do downloads, they can get witness statements, they can talk to the first responders, And they can gather all of that information so that it's just as fresh for them as it is for the rapid response team. Okay, so you've gotten my point that this is something that's critically important. How do you know that your attorney, or how do you know if you are an attorney, that you're doing the right things that are necessary to preserve this evidence in the first 48 hours? Well, the first thing that any knowledgeable, skilled, and experienced attorney is going to do once they sign a case up is they're going to send what's called a spoliation letter. A spoliation, it sounds like spoiling, and it's certainly taken from that kind of root, but it's basically putting the defense on notice that they have a duty to preserve evidence, and it's letting them know that litigation is very likely. The letter serves as kind of a shot across the bow to say, you need to do whatever you can to stop any type of deleting mechanisms you have for text messages or emails or voicemails or anything like that, and you need to start preserving that evidence. It's also telling them you need to suspend any operations that you may have in terms of trying to decide whether evidence could be deleted or if it's not relevant, such as the truck, black box data, anything, and give us an opportunity to go and inspect that, and we can look at this together and draw our own conclusions about it. That's why it's so important to get an attorney who's handled these cases before, who knows what these cases look like, and they have the wherewithal and the resources to send investigators out, to make the right phone calls, send the right letters, do the right things necessary to preserve evidence. As I've said before, truck crashes are not like car crashes, and you can't make up for a lack of truck experience by having handled thousands of car accident cases. And so if you're in that first 48 hours, get an attorney who knows how to handle truck crash cases. And the best way to figure that out is to get someone who is board certified in truck accident law. Right now, there's probably about 100 of us attorneys across the country who have the board certification. And we got that by handling a whole lot of these cases, by establishing that we know what we're doing, by taking and passing a board bar exam, and by getting references from judges and attorneys who could attest that, yes, these are cases that we handle them well, we know what we're doing, and we're ethical to boot. So let that be your starting place. But the most important thing to take from this is to act quickly. Act as quickly as you can to preserve evidence after a truck crash happens. You need to make sure that you are not treated unfairly because the other side has a head start and they may not have saved evidence that is critical for your case. I want to thank you for watching this video. I hope that you're not watching this because you or a loved one was hurt or even killed in a truck crash. I do want to emphasize that if that's your story, please act quickly. I know that you have a million things going on right now. The last thing you want to do is to engage in this type of deep dive to try to figure out what to do. If you need some guidance, give me a call, reach out. I'd be more than happy to see if I can point you in the right direction. If you're an attorney who's looking for some guidance, reach out. Happy to chat with you and see if we can point you in the right direction as well. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, please like, and please stay tuned for more videos. Thanks.